Welcome everyone to Caster Calls with ZombieGrub episode 61. I'm here with Jorosar, which might be a familiar face if you are a real old school StarCraft fan, but also familiar face if you have been interested in PUBG, doing some racing stuff, which I believe we'll get into. I'm just going to kind of call it racing stuff because it is a world that is really something I don't know much about aside from, like Rotterdam talking about it. And me just kind of zoning it out a little bit. So we'll get into more depth into that. But yeah, so you've been around esports for a very long time, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. I've started getting white hairs, which I definitely didn't have when I first got into esports. It's been a long time. I think uh coming on and like asking me to come on, it made me think when like my first events and when I actually got into it was. And I think I've concluded it was summer of 2010, I want to say.
Okay.
Or
So
whenever was it 2010 or 2011? Like the beta Wings of Liberty
2010.
beta. Yep.
2010,
So
yeah.
that July 2010 would be when I picked up the game, which means I probably bought a mic and started attempting to. I say attempting because that is the correct word. Starting out, commentate maybe 3 months later. So it's been a while. This is now 12 years and counting.
If you were there in the beginning of StarCraft 2, you were kind of there at the beginning of the birth of modern esports, or perhaps just whatever you would call like pre-modern, but not super super old
not
because
not
there's
prehistoric.
yeah, there you go, exactly. Because maybe modern is more like at the onset of all the popular titles we have now, which maybe is more like 2013, 2014. But yeah,
You
the
mean
whole,
you mean Dota's not a mod for Warcraft anymore?
I
What?
know, it's insane. Who would thought that was gonna happen? But no, like those first years, the onset of Twitch made specifically for all these StarCraft tournaments that were happening on Justin
Yeah.
TV. It's kind of the beginning of the history, I suppose, that would be important to a lot of the new faces of esports, all the Zoomer generation of esports. I was
Hey,
discussing that
who
with my
who
last
don't understand what StarCraft 2 matches on Own 3D were like.
Nope, they don't. Oh man, that's a there's a lot of throwback names, man. Talking about Ding It and stuff. Anyways, so yeah, you've been around and you've kind of been able to see all of this happen. You were around as well when I think StarCraft was a bit more of a pushing others down to get ahead esport, which eventually became kind of a smaller, just everyone's okay because there really isn't a whole lot of competition. So you saw that as well as I guess other esports that would have the same thing happen once they
Yeah.
were deemed the new important esport. There was a lot of bad characters, so that's probably an interesting topic we'll get on to. Not that we have to focus on it completely, but the point is, you've been around. You've seen a lot, so I'm interested to hear your story into how you got into first video games, and then how you actually got into the world of esports and your eventual first paid gig. So lay it on me.
Oh wow. First video games will take me back quite a while. So without wanting to show my age completely, my first video game that I remember playing repeatedly, as opposed to like go to an arcade and play this as a one-off, was probably a game called Stormlord.
Okay.
For those of you who've never seen one, it was on a 5.25-inch floppy disk, and we booted it from DOS. You can go online and look this up, and I'm pretty sure I never got past the second level ever. And I probably played that on, I don't know if it was a 386 or a 486, because desktop computers had names like iPhones back then, guys. It was great. For a couple of years, before moving on to different things, sort of going into like secondary school sort of age. Maybe primary school, secondary school was when the Game Boys started exploding and becoming really popular. And actually, if you go back, I want to say a year or two before or after, but time kind of becomes a bit of an abstract concept so long ago. Digimon, Tamagotchis, and that sort of thing as well helped fuel, even though they're not like video games in the way we think of them, it definitely fueled a digital and being competitive sort of like merging of those two worlds. And I think my first experience playing anything competitively was a top-down space shooter game called Subspace. It was subsequently renamed Continuum, and I believe it still exists today as a free-to-play game somewhere on the internet. And I also played a text browser game called Utopia, which I think is the world's longest running MMORPG and still is. Like, they reset the game every 3 months. It's I don't mind doing a little plug for them. They're utopia-game.com now. I've stopped playing that now, but I did play for 17 years.
Wow.
And then so that was everything that was like 2D sort of top down.
Uh-huh.
Uh and then back in Hong Kong, which I appreciate isn't exactly the esports powerhouse of the universe, but actually we've got some pretty cool players. I played the only 2 games I've ever played competitively that could be considered esports back before the term was in wide use. I played Rainbow Six, specifically Rogue Spear and Urban Operations, so like OG Rainbow
Mhm.
Six almost. And I played Counter-Strike 1.5 competitively, which a lot of people don't like. It's weird because I've done PUBG, I did StarCraft 2 for goodness knows how many years, and the only games I was really competitive at was CS 1.5. And I distinctly remember 1.6, which for the record, by the way, was a great game, but to my 13 or 14-year-old brain was like, oh my God, you've made hitboxes like this. Headshots are too easy now. I'm rage quitting. And it turns out I had to focus on things like school anyway, so it wasn't too bad. Um, that was sort of early years. And back then there was a huge LAN center sort of culture, or net cafe sort of culture. It's normal after school or on the weekend to get a whole bunch of people down to these like LAN centers and enjoy 10, 12 hours of gaming at a pop. And what was great about that was our parents weren't worried that we were out till like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning because they knew exactly where we were, and they knew we were completely safe, tucked away in our little sort of sweaty nerd box, and it was all fine. So oh, those were the good days, man. And I guess to round it all off, games I played as an enthusiast, and I was pretty good competitively, but I never sought out to win competitions and stuff. The original Command and Conquer Red Alert, as well as Age of Empires 1 and 2, because mythology totally went downhill.
Yeah.
Don't at me. It just did. Um, and that's probably what got me kickstarted into RTS, if I'm
Mhm.
being perfectly honest. I sort of went via those games into the brief stint in FPS with Counter Strike and Rogue Spear, and then picked up Warcraft 3. And through Warcraft 3, I picked up Dota when it wasn't still in beta. I wasn't like a mega early adopter, but I definitely played when it was a mod up to something like 6 point something. I'm sure like more sweaty nerds than me will know exactly what time that is. 6.39 or something like that. I played Dota up to. And it was roughly then, I think, that I was just about, or I was coming back home because I was completing my second year of university at this point. And it was during the summer, or just as I was coming back home for the summer, that I knew StarCraft 2 was in beta. And I'd never played the original StarCraft or Brood War, but I'd watched it, like YouTube videos and stuff on it, and I quite enjoyed it. So I knew it was a game I wanted, and I queued up at the local computer center to make sure I got my pre-order in, and I got it on launch day and stuff like that. Completely scuppered a family holiday, which they definitely weren't pleased about. Went back to uni and played a lot. Um, Sadly, the very first season of StarCraft, before Grandmaster even existed, I hit Master, which means if anyone ever asks whether I've been in the top tier of StarCraft, I can sort of say that and just pretend that makes it all good. I'm terrible. So, from a playing point of view, things went downhill from there. But that's when I started listening to more StarCraft 2 matches
Mhm.
on YouTube. And there were a couple of reasonably prominent commentators at the time, who weren't people you would normally see at live events, but did a lot of YouTube material. And I would listen to these and I would go, they sound all right, but I don't think what they're saying is very accurate. Or in one case, I would go, can you at least make it sound entertaining? And I think it's unfair because these were probably very specific games where it's like there are actually other things that you could be focusing on as well. And it was at that point where I realized, I don't want to sit here and be like this internet troll and criticize when you could attempt to do the same thing and see if you're any good at it. So that's when I bought my first USB plug-in mic and started doing audio only casts direct to YouTube. And I probably did that for between 4 and 6 months. My God, casting 4-gate versus 4-gate back
Oh
then
yeah.
meant you couldn't take a breath in 6.5 minutes. It was great. I loved it. Uh, and then off the back of that was sort of my first journey into esports, but still not paid, where a website some of you may remember called Playhem TV asked me to if I would be interested in commentating some $50 an evening cups as a volunteer. And for those of you who don't remember Playhem TV, it is quite a long time ago now. You might remember names like Shamtu, Katu, Robin, also known as Trickslayer, for those who followed Heroes of the Storm, Zoya, Frodan, Unctious. So we were all part of like that Playhem TV crew back in, it's got to be something like mid sort of Q1 2011 through to the start of 2013,
Mhm.
something like that. And even when I started getting hired for my first paid gigs, I would still always go back and try and do 1 or 2 broadcasts a week for them. I'm not actually 100% sure where all of those people even are these days. I know that Frodan is definitely still in the industry.
Mhm.
I know Shamtu is still in the industry, but is like more involved in the production side of things and like behind the
Uh,
camera kind of stuff.
yeah, he helps out with a lot of Brood War stuff, but he's
That's right.
primarily, a developer, software developer, back end, front end, I don't
Gotcha.
know.
And I know Zoya went on to do a lot of stuff in World of Warcraft,
Right.
but I'm
Yeah.
not 100% sure what he's doing right now
Mhm.
because I never got into WoW myself, but I knew he was there or thereabouts. But yeah, it's weird seeing how like some of the people I met back then are still very much involved in the industry in some way or the other now, and it's nice to see that passion continue to carry through.
Yeah. That's a It gets us up to about the start of, like, I guess, the big boom of esports, so it's a nice place to halt for now, because I know you have plenty of your career to talk about, literally another 11 years. So,
Oh
um
God, I feel so old.
I know, right? I know, just thinking about those early days being over a decade old is insane. But I remember those, right? Like, it was just such an insanely popular game because, I
Yeah.
mean, obviously it was the second game to a very popular first game. It, had that competitive nature to it because they literally designed it, and they had, the developers had knowledge of the Brood War esports scene in Korea.
Mhm.
Um, and then it just kind of came alongside. It was one of the first big games that kind of came with that competitive aspect when the internet was very, I think, accessible might be the right word. It wasn't going to like geosites or trying to
Sure.
find like the RTMP link or something like that. Even though you still had to watch TV player in 240p, it was still more
Oh, I
accessible.
remember that.
Yeah, it was still more accessible. So it just kind of hit this like perfect moment. And of course, it was also the only esport that was super super popular. CS and Dota and League of Legends were all, infants at that time. Quickly
Yeah.
growing, but still. So yeah, Playhem would happen literally every day. And it would get like a decent amount of viewers too. Because I remember watching the sidebar of Team Liquid, which is what I still do because I'm a boomer, I guess. And seeing all the viewership for that. So it was I think it actually was kind of worth it to go back, even if it didn't pay you, because this was also
100%.
going to be back in the time where you didn't get paid for a lot of stuff, even some of the really big stuff. It was absolutely seen as more of a opportunity to come on and potentially get paid later. And when you did get paid, it was not a lot. I think people who've listened to this podcast, you guys might have heard some of the other OGs talk about how much they actually got paid. So you guys know, or anyone out there in the internet who's like, back in 2010, day nine was paid $2,000 a day. It's like, buddy, it's not even for the weekend. What are you doing?
He would have retired in 2014 if that were true. Come on, man.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, this was the good old Wild West that you found yourself rather invested into. You were kind of making the right moves to potentially be brought up. So yeah, you're working as a basically a community commentator, and I know you do that for a little while, but then you get bigger and bigger. I suppose community casts kind of become a staple of the, I want to say, like, B stream commentators, not to be like derogatory or anything like that, but just
No, not at
hard to
all.
break into the main lineup of people who had actually come over from Brood War and just had positions like in Korea where they just were going to be popular. So, what was your next step then? Did you decide to try and really make the esports thing work, or were you pretty keen on just kind of having it as a hobby?
So, um, that's actually a multi-year question, but I will explain why. Off the back of Playhem, I started getting invited to become a community caster on the B stream. So it's funny we were talking about B streams for a couple of Dream Hacks and the odd IEM as well. And back then, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Chelsea, which sounds really nice for those of you who know the UK in London, but it was also like a big council block. So don't get your hopes up. Where in order to afford it, I moved into the living room and sublet out the bedroom. So literally my entire life was in one room. And because of that, I had my desk, like my playing setup, at the foot of my bed. Now, initially, I just had a microphone in front of me, so that was fine. But eventually, I had to get a webcam as well, and that um, spawned a couple of memes, shall we say, back before we even called them memes. In fact, Jess, I've just emailed you one, so you know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So, from one of the DreamHack ISO opens, I want to say, all the way back in the day, where Reddit would absolutely rip into me casting in front of an immaculately made bed. Because if the bed is 90% of your background, it's got to be, you got to make your bed, right? They also correctly predicted that the rest of the room wasn't quite as immaculate as the webcam made it seem. So I did a lot of my casts from there for a while. And my first paid gig was a UK based gig at Insomnia. I would eventually also, I can't remember if it was at this event or my second Insomnia, so apologies if I get this wrong, but it's also where I met Maddles. Um, and it was Insomnia 45, which I want to say Sting beat Bling in the finals, but I can't actually remember if that was 45 or not. So I got paid my accommodation, which was an unused room in a student hall. So literally like basic bed with a sheet and that's it, and a communal bathroom between like 5 other members of staff that were staying in those rooms. I got my train ticket paid for, and I got £100, which was to my university student brain mega, and that was my first break. And I say it was my first break because it felt like an online cast. It was very much like a desk setup. It wasn't a big stage or anything like that. I just happened to be commentating from the event. But the thing I remember most about it is actually feeding off the energy of hearing the people cheering for the player close to me. Nowadays, if you hear too much of that as a professional, you'd be like, oh my goodness, can we soundproof this thing, please? But back then, I remember almost being in awe of it and that carrying me through. And off the back of that broadcast, I have to assume it's that rather than Playhem, but I guess it could have been both. ESL contacted me asking if I would be interested to do an event in IFA Berlin. I don't remember the title of the event. I remember I was doing it with Ryan Reinierson and James Carroll, so Calaris, and the three of us would take turns hosting, and the other two would cast, and we'd rotate every best of 3. So it definitely wasn't a set roles kind of thing. So that was my first international event that happened quite soon after Insomnia, and I'm still doing all the Playhem stuff and the community cast for DreamHack in the background. And I don't think it was James's first event, uh, but I think it was near the start of his career as well. So it was an awful lot of fun. And I know that David Reinierson is now also a software developer, but occasionally dabbles in esports. So everyone's still sort of hanging around the periphery. And I got paid more for that broadcast. Nowhere near what like we would consider being paid as professionals by today's standards, but it was enough to uh, impress somebody to the point where I got contacted asking if I'd be willing to do IEM. And in the same week, I think I had an email asking if I could do IEM and a DreamHack. So that's where things really started to kick off, because back then there were at least 3, possibly up to 5 DreamHack events a year, and there were certainly 3 or 4 IEM events as well. And while I don't remember the exact order, I know that um, I would eventually get to a point where I feel like I had done every DreamHack and IEM event for something like a 2-year period, sort of 2013 to 2015. Um, and I remember needing to ask several tournament organizers if they would be willing to change my flight so that I could fly directly from one gig to another, because I didn't have enough time to fly back to London first. So I flew directly from Las Vegas for the IPL 4 season finals directly to IEM Singapore, for example. But in between all of that, there's one more big community cast, which is why I definitely don't want to thumb down any of the community cast stories. And arguably the biggest community cast I've ever done in StarCraft 2 was off the back of a trip where I did 3 different things. I participated online in what IGN called their caster search contest. They were looking for casters for IPL 5. Is it 4 or 5? If I use those numbers interchangeably, I'm so sorry. And I remember they had 8 finalists, but I knew that a big consideration for their caster search was that they didn't really want to spend a lot of money on transport and accommodation, flying people over and stuff. So of the 8 finalists, I was the only person outside of North America. So in the back of my mind, I was thinking, cool, it means you're pretty good at this, but it also means you better not mess this up. And I did 3 events in that one trip, which I went to the IPL offices and did with Kevin Nocky, I did a best of 9 Fight Club series. I don't remember who was playing, but I remember like I was a guest, and on the Saturday I did Fight Club with Kevin Nocky, best of 9. And on the Sunday with Doa, I did the GSL Team Arena Challenge. I remember FX Open were playing because I remember casting Lenok, I think, but I don't remember who they were faced up against. And I still have a GSTL t-shirt upstairs somewhere that Doa gave me that day after visiting the IGN offices, which was really cool. I slept on Kevin Nocky's couch, which is I don't know if you've spoken to him about it, but it's the esports couch. I think more than 50 people who are either casters or involved in esports in some way have slept on that couch. I don't know if him and Catherine still have it. I slightly kind of low-key hope they don't. So that was great. And I went straight from there to the MLG Spring Championships in Anaheim, where I was casting the B stream. And it was the coolest B stream cast ever, because this was the event where Kespa sent their Brood War pros to do exhibition matches for StarCraft 2. So while you had like Tastosis and Mr. Bitter and Total Biscuit doing all the main stage present, I think Rob Simpson was there, but don't quote me on that. Day 9 was definitely there as well.
Yeah.
I remember because he'd run backstage like a maniac in between his cast, high-fiving everyone. I'm not saying he was on something, but he was fun. It was great. I cast Calm versus Bisu, which back then especially is like, oh my god, this is proper like Flash J-Dong level top billing. And then we watched 2 Terran players make 15 barracks and literally pump out Marines and just send them into the middle of the map. It was like atrocious compared to what we would expect to watch even a couple of months later once they'd moved over, because their mechanics and the way they were looking at things was so deep rooted in Brood War. There was none of this, oh, just control all of this at once. No. We have to do everything individually because that's how our muscle memory works. And just watching I'm not saying it could have been like, it was like watching 2 silver level Terrans play against each other, but on the battlefield itself, it was GM level micro. It was weird, really weird. I did that. And then finally the GESL, which was a one-off LAN event there. That happened just after MLG. Sadly, it was short lived, but it was also a really fun event. It was more of an intimate atmosphere, about 300 people watching, and it was just there as a StarCraft 2 event with some like DJ set up and merch available. It was pretty cool.
Hmm.
And at the end of that trip was when I was confirmed to do the IPL finals. And that's what I wouldn't say kickstarted the travel because I had done one or two DreamHack events by then, but that was properly the point where I flew into Vegas for those finals, went straight to IEM Singapore, came back to London for a week, had a different event. I think it might have been a DreamHack after that. And the next year and a half, 2 years of my life were realistically built around how do I make sure I constantly have time off of work by then, or time off of doing other stuff to mold around. This is DreamHack, this is IEM, this is a different event, and I'm like trying to make time for everything. Um, so yeah, that was an interesting phase of my life because it, from an esports point of view, it was kind of same to the outside. It was very much I'm continuously doing these events, trying to hone my craft, trying to get better. But behind the scenes, I was getting a full-time job, trying to make sure that I could juggle both, trying to make
Hmm.
sure that I don't mess up in one place or the other. And it was
Right.
actually quite transformative.
Yeah. And you said that's a multi-year battle as well, that you went through the same thought
Yeah.
processes?
So in 2013, I joined a digital marketing agency. And uh, long story short, Google don't do, or I shouldn't say don't do in case it's partially not true these days, but to my knowledge, Google don't do their own advertising, which is good because they own the platforms they're advertising on, right? So
Mm.
outsourcing it to a third party like makes sense. And from a transparency and like non-monopoly point of view, it just makes sense. And I happened to join the agency that was doing a lot of Google's advertising for them. So when it came to learning a new skill and understanding what makes things tick in the world of digital marketing, you can't get much better than the budgets. In fact, you can't get better than the budgets that Google set aside for that sort of thing, without revealing too much. It meant that like things that other even blue chip companies would learn in a couple of months, we'd learn in 8 hours. Like that sort of level of. So it was really fun, but really challenging. And there were a lot of late nights in the office, trying to make things work across a whole bunch of different Google products and some non Google stuff as well. And I remember 6 months into the job. So I got the job middle of, I want to say middle of 2013. So I'd left uni, 2004 through 2008. I worked for myself because I did an import export business out of my bedroom, which is definitely don't need to go in. Basically, my bedroom was full of boxes and I was selling stuff online. But I was really good with SEO. So I had a lot of people coming through to the website and buying it. And that's how I sustained my lifestyle. And my mom was extremely disapproving of this because she desperately wanted me to get a real job. Uh,
That's what the kids are all
so
doing now anyways. So make hot
it,
like
it,
big
it
money
is
now.
like back then I sold virtual items on Diablo 2.
Okay.
Like before the word soulbound was an idea in anyone's head, I was making money off Diablo 2. But I definitely didn't gold farm in WoW, so you don't have to hate me for that. Um, so yeah, the first real job, quote unquote, 2013. 6 months into that, I went, I really enjoy this job, but I also really enjoy casting, and I want to make sure I set time aside to do things like VOD reviews, network with people in the industry, make sure that I'm in the right place at the right time in terms of seizing opportunities, because just being good back then didn't get you anywhere, and now arguably doesn't get you anywhere either. You still need to know who you need to know who to speak to and when and why and how you present yourself. um, I need time to do all of those things, so I made myself a promise. I said that at the point where my work in esports reached, even for 1 year only, two-thirds of my income on my day job, I think in the back of my mind I would have been happy with half. I go full time and I pursue
Mm.
it full time. Um, so I continued, and this is like we're now talking like start of 2014 kind of territory. So I was still doing the Dream Hacks, the IEMs. There was that one tournament in, I want to say Dream Hack Bucharest, where I was casting the grand finals with Apollo, And because we had gone on too long, like some of the matches just took ages because Broodlords, um, the heavy metal concert in the hall next door, which was literally a cloth curtain separating us from them, started at like 10 p.m. on the dot or something after a 12-hour day. And we realized halfway through after game one or game two, after this started, it was actually impossible for us to continue the broadcast.
Mm.
So somewhere on Twitter is me typing at 170 words per minute, constantly feeding tweets to the world about what was going on in these grand finals because we couldn't be on the mic anymore.
Wow.
Oh, that was good fun. But so through all of this, I was trying to juggle the day job, and I said, once I hit this point, I'm gonna put all my chips in and do esports full time. And then I still liked my day job. It wasn't something that I was desperate to get away from. It was just a milestone that I knew I had to hit. The problem was I started getting promoted. So I got promoted a couple of times. I ended up getting approached by a rival agency to join them at director level. And from a ignore whether I'm casting or not, it's one of those things where if you put your thinking cap on, it's a no-brainer. Like
Yeah.
you say yes to things like that when your career takes you in that direction. And this is probably now mid 2015. And I would say that's the point where I made the realization that in order for me to continue working and be considered any sort of top tier in the gaming industry as a commentator, um, I would need to find a way to make those two parts of my life work side by side.
Mm.
And because I was no longer in a position where I felt like I wanted one side or the other to take over because I wasn't trying to get away from my job. I also didn't want to devote less time to casting because I loved it so much. So the solution is find time, make it work. And from about that point onwards was kind of when I realized that this is how things are going to be.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
Is that how it's been for the last 8 years? Is that was 2014?
it has been, yes.
Okay.
And it actually came at quite an opportune time because, and again, possibly slightly muddled with dates, so apologies if it's slightly off, but I want to say in 2015 was when Blizzard made the decision to have a permanent studio in Burbank for StarCraft 2.
Okay.
And at that point, for North American StarCraft 2, they hired in house talent and had people there full time.
Right.
And at the same time, mirroring that decision, ESL did the same thing for Europe
Mm-hmm.
and had a number of talent who are brilliant, by the way, absolutely no slight on them, join them full time. I know Calaris and Todd were two of them, but
Yeah.
I'm sure there was a third or fourth person as well. So it meant that was kind of a point where it was a weird one for me because I always make sure to seek as much feedback as I can get from the tournament organizers and my peers after each of the events that I did. And despite all the good feedback coming in and a lot of oh, cool, can't wait to see you for the next one. Um, After those decisions were made, it's like you got ghosted by everyone. It was
Mm.
really weird. So nothing really happened. I'd love to be able to say there was big drama or big controversy, but honestly, overnight, if you were a contractor, it kind of dried up pretty quickly. There was space for the occasional ex-pro player to join a panel as an analyst. Um, but aside from that, that was it.
Yeah.
So it didn't hit me as hard as it could have for other people in a similar situation because my day job and my career was actually going reasonably well at that point. But emotionally, it was still really frustrating to know that you're doing a good job and then not get called back.
Mm.
But that's as I've come to learn to an extent, that's the nature of the industry, and it's just a thing that happens from a business perspective and from a we want to make sure that we can deliver continuity, the best possible broadcast at a cost that doesn't break the bank. I can completely see the appeal of Blizzard and ESL at the time, wanting
Mhm.
to say, cool, let's invest money to build a permanent studio and make sure we have the same people coming back. And the solution to doing that was, and I can only speak on ESL's case because I knew less about North America, was to make sure that we have full-time casters. We've got them across all of our events, but they could do other games as well. And it meant that the casters were constantly getting work. It meant that they were able to provide good level commentary across all of their titles. It made a lot of sense, but I could also tell, and this is the part where it becomes speculation from me.
Mm.
I can also tell this is the part where if I had gone full time casting and I had done something like that, that's where the passion starts like to seep out. Because if you're employed full time to do that, to an extent, that's living the dream. And I would say we have a neighbor's cat who does exactly the same thing. You'll occasionally see a black tail move across the screen. Um, I should clarify, I don't own any cats, but four of them just like to freely wander in and out. It's weird. Um, uh, yeah, if that were me, I would love doing some events, and then I'd be like, oh, but I also have to do like next weekend, I have to get sent to do this as well, and you're being paid a salary to do it, so you're not getting paid any more to go do all of these other events. And it got to a point where, again, speculation, it looked like some people who maybe enjoy one or two games were casting 6 or 7 games.
Right.
And it was like, that's fine because it's a job. But I feel like that would eat into, in fact, I knew it would eat into what passion looks like for me.
Yeah.
So it's, it's a tricky one because at, at the same, on the one hand, people would kill for that kind of opportunity. I'm absolutely not like shoving negativity that way at all. But on the other, I could quite quickly see that if offered that opportunity, I would love it at the beginning and I could see it starting to eat away at me. So
Yeah.
I'm reasonably happy with staying the way I did, but it also meant that everything StarCraft 2 dried up overnight and I had to look for other things that piqued my interest.
Right. Yeah, that was a big conversation. It is a big conversation, I should say, about whether you should have like a set number of commentators. Upside is that obviously they have a steady amount of work. They can really hone on their craft. They can
Sure.
build chemistry, not just with a particular co-caster, but even with the production can be a benefit.
Yes.
But the downside, of course, is um, the boring aspect of it, I suppose. Doing a lot of those, as you said, the studio gigs, which really aren't the best. I mean, it's kind of nice to be at least be there with your pals, your co-casters, but it's not the same as going to an event, doing something with a crowd and having that
No.
excitement of a weekend event
No.
as well.
Yeah.
And you don't have any room for new talent. So, a lot of people will say that the perfect mixture is something where there's like a main league and then there's a bunch of like smaller stuff happening. But that would only ever happen on a certain scale, even for the biggest esports. Even
Yeah.
Valorant, they have a main league. It's a very popular game. How many of their like kind of side things are going to have big offline events? Not too many of them. And certainly for StarCraft in 2015, you're right. That would be basically nothing. I mean, they didn't have that many commentators for the studio gigs to begin with compared to some other stuff where there's like 6 plus. There was, I think, literally
Yep.
three. I think
I think
if
so.
like
Yeah.
two people couldn't make it, it was just like one person solo casting. It was Kalara solo casting for 12 hours. Um, and
Oh,
then
those were the days.
yeah, and then there was like nothing else beyond that because it was totally under Blizzard's control, which worked with ESL. So,
Sure.
anyways, that was you're spot on. Like I'm kind of fleshing this out just to clarify that this isn't any type of saltiness. There is no like,
No,
well,
no,
there's
no.
like 6 other people doing other jobs at that time. No, there really wasn't. There was people who made an online name for themselves, like a tournament organizer like Base Trade TV or popular
Mm.
streamers. But basically that was it. There was like this huge divide between what the A-listers were doing, if you want to call them that, and what the B stream commentators were doing, and the latter didn't really exist kind of, at
Yes.
that point. Um,
Exactly.
yeah.
It's more. It's more. How do I put it? Like early 20s salty Jaro would be like, oh, I didn't get called back, and I keep getting good feedback. People love having me there. What's wrong? And it's not that at all. Um it's the economics and the sort of higher level. This is where we want to go
Mhm.
with the title, like the corporate decisions that sort of trickle down and lead to these as consequences. So um it took me, I think it's fair to say, especially for StarCraft 2, because I still love the game to bits and I would hop back in a heartbeat. No question about it. But it it took me a year or two to properly develop the no, seriously, you don't need to just tell yourself this. It really isn't personal. It's just like this is the way the industry operates. And from a point of view of yourself as on screen talent, what you're seeing is a tiny piece of the puzzle, which is important. It's your livelihood. It's like you want to be on camera, you want to interact with your colleagues, your fans. It's important, it's your world. But in the big scheme of um, financing and sustaining a game title as an esport, it is one piece of the puzzle. So does it suck that those decisions feel like that they're being made without you in mind? Yes. But does uh does older boomer Jaro look back at that and go, oh, I kind of get it? I think the answer to that's also yes, to be fair.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you were in a position that, as you said, you had your day job to fall back on. Many others were at that point forced to seriously consider their other options, and
Right.
if they could still be a full time esports, then they'd have to move on. And there was definitely a few games. I mean, Legacy of the Void actually came out at that time, so if you really wanted to make a push towards being like an online content creator, you could have. Heroes of the Storm. Overwatch, I think, was announced in 2015, so people were really setting their sights on that one. Heroes of the Storm was still going and not just abruptly ending like it eventually did. And then a bunch of other games, of course. And PUBG came out, I want to say, within a year or two of that, right? So, because PUBG, I always think of it as a new game, but then I'm always reminded that it's really not. It's
Is it not
kind of
still in alpha? What?
yeah, it's weird. I'm still not playing with, like, friends, having no idea what we're doing, like, 6 years ago. But no, like, so that came out, right? And I know you got involved in that. You're still involved with that. See you, picking up gigs, going to places. And then you also all apparently had a lot of experience with Formula One. So, just to
Yes.
quickly, I guess, kind of, eh, eh, put a bow on the career here. Can you kind of speed through the other esports that you've done, the other type of, I guess, competitive career points in your life?
Yeah, the oh, wow. Um, where do I begin? So every title that you've mentioned, I've touched in some way.
Hmm.
Heroes of the Storm is a unique one for me because I started producing some content and I did a couple of events for Heroes of the Storm. Um, Coming from a Dota background, I obviously saw that like I appreciated the differences, but I'm thinking, oh, this is like an easy version of Dota. But when you get a 5 stack that's really good with their teamwork, it's actually impressively high still, the skill ceiling. So I
Hmm.
was fine watching it. Heroes was possibly the only title I've ever worked on where I made a decision not to actively pursue uh additional events because of other talent, which is really weird. So Heroes and to a smaller extent StarCraft 2. And I won't elaborate on this too much, but let's just say um, I was really shocked by the way some talent treated production people off camera. So it
Okay.
was like perfectly professional on camera and getting to the point where like mice and keyboards were being thrown around off camera and swearing at staff. And I was like, I don't really want to be in the same room as stuff like this happening. It's not healthy. Well, I'm not the one receiving the abuse, so it was way worse for other people. But I was thinking this can't possibly be a healthy environment for me to be in either.
Hmm.
So I dabbled in it, but ultimately chose not to actively pursue. Um, and when Overwatch was announced, there were shadows of StarCraft all over this because I admittedly by a number of hours because of time difference, but I cast the first Overwatch LAN so at Takeover, and
Yeah.
I was reasonably involved with Overwatch in the beta. I cast a lot of online stuff. I did the first Overwatch LAN, did the Face It E League $300,000 open, like at the infancy of Overwatch, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I remember like watching Seagulls rise to prominence, for example, and North American organizations mixing it up with EU on a daily basis. It was a lot of fun. And then Overwatch League got announced.
Hmm.
And there were conversations about being involved in Overwatch League. but ultimately it was a slightly better handled version from my personal perspective of what happened with StarCraft, which is right. Well, we know where we're going to be based. We know where the studio is. This is where you're going to have to move. You're going to have to literally like up and leave and move over to the States for us to even consider thinking about using you for anything.
Right.
Um, and because of the way Blizzard wanted to manage Overwatch leagues, it very much like in housing it and making it their thing, there weren't really tournaments outside of that anymore. Not until they created Contenders sometime later. So Overwatch actually dried up the same way that StarCraft did, in more of a structured way and in more of a planned way. But the same thing happened overnight after getting quite heavily involved in the early days, um, which was frustrating until PUBG came out. And by this point, I don't classify Overwatch as a shooter in the same way I would classify like
Yeah.
Counter Strike as a shooter, for example. Like, um, it's just a different genre. That we're not aiming for realism here or anything like that, right?
No.
So when PUBG came out and I started playing the game, I was legitimately taken aback by how much I enjoyed playing. Uh, I don't think I enjoyed playing a game where it was like sort of game of inches, one shot can kill you kind of thing since CS 1.5. Because, in between then, I dipped into Dota. I did a lot of StarCraft 2, Heroes of the Storm. Yeah, even did a bit of Hearthstone at some point. And then I've recently come off the back of Overwatch. So I was expecting to go back into the RTS space and like rediscover my love there and see what other opportunities there were. And then I realized I actually really enjoy playing PUBG. So I picked up PUBG in the beta. I've cast a ridiculous number of games, but to the premiere broadcast, I was still a little bit of a latecomer. I wasn't in a position where I'd spoken to the right people early enough in the game's infancy to be there from the get go. But I still flew myself out to events and did like interviews with the players and things like that within Europe, even at events I wasn't working.
Mhm.
Um, Always thoroughly enjoyed it. And I thought, okay, this is like comparable levels of enjoyment that I used to have to StarCraft 2, which is excellent. I'm going to keep going with this. Ended up getting a bunch of gigs, and it culminated with I was hosting the World Championship at the end of last year, for example, which was absolutely lovely. And it continues to be a really fun game for me to put efforts into, and I'm looking forward to hopefully doing more there next year. But throughout this, you touched a bit on racing, and this one's weird. I'll try and fly through. Although to someone watching, it's probably like, hang on a second, where did this come from? So in 2007, so to backtrack all the way back to my university days, um, my degree is aerospace materials engineering. I before esports, so we're talking like between 2007 and 2010, although it wasn't continuous for 3 years or anything like that. I did a stint at McLaren F1. So I was a stress analyst and materials engineer on the McLaren Formula One race team down in Woking. So what that basically entails is when the cars finish driving fast in Silverstone and something breaks on them, they get like trucked or choppered down to the factory or whatever. And I'm the guy in charge of chopping them up, looking at it under a microscope and telling them what went wrong and how to build it better next time. So it less glamorous than you think, but the factory's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Also, back then, Lewis Hamilton was actually a legit, really fun guy to talk to. Like, had a few conversations with him outside the staff canteen and stuff. This was like pre-world titles and stuff like that. Super humble. I suspect maybe not so much these days, but I don't know. He hasn't got my number on speed dial or anything like that. But never the two worlds met. I was always an enthusiast for racing. I raced go-karts competitively while I was at university. It probably comes as no surprise to anyone who's ever taken one look at me that I'm clearly too heavy to be competitive at go-karting nowadays. I'm not a 40-kilo featherweight. Zoom. Doesn't really work. I've literally got the racing rig set up right here for when I do stream like Formula One and stuff like that. So I've always really enjoyed it. I've just never worked in it. And more recently in my career, sort of side by side with PUBG, I picked up the Logitech McLaren G Challenge, which was back then. I don't think it is this year, But I worked with them for 4 years. They were the world's largest sim racing competition. Over 15,000 people were like competing to be in the grand finals and stuff like that. It was really, really good fun. Um, and I actually got to put some of my like racing knowledge and expertise to good use. I never thought that would ever happen. So I did that like 2017 through to last year and ended up um, dipping my toes in the television space because during the COVID lockdown and the pandemic, Formula E had to cancel the season because it became too logistically difficult to fly everyone around. And they had something called the Race at Home Challenge, where they still got the grid of Formula E together and they built a Formula E specific mod in an online, like I would say game, but really it was a sim.
Hmm.
And they still had virtual races with the commentary team and stuff like that. And I was hired as a commentator to and an analyst to break down from an esports point of view Formula E during COVID, which was incredible. Very different from esports. So I was on like BBC Eurosport, a bunch of international channels. I think officially there were 25. I don't know what they are, but it was really cool. But going from an environment where at a DreamHack, as I'm sure you can appreciate, someone in your ear just goes, "You need to fill for about 45 minutes," and that's it. And you just talk to an environment where you say, coming into the next segment, you have to fill for exactly 39 seconds and we're going to break. And I'm sat there going, but I've got three things I want to talk. And zoom, instantly like
Mm,
trying. It is such a different environment,
yeah.
completely removed from esports. The knowledge is there, like knowing what to do with my voice and what's important is there. But the time scales and how tight everything has to be and how well packaged it all has to be
Yeah.
is like night and day compared to what we're used to for, say, a typical online production. It was incredible.
Mhm, mhm. I've talked to a couple people who've done like quote unquote real production, like outside esports production, and that's a point that they've
Sure.
talked about. But the one thing that always sticks out in my brain, because he was a hilarious guy, is In Control talking about it. He went on like big news TV show, forget which one it was, with Mike Morheim back.
Yep.
Back I don't forget when. I think before the Olympics actually, because that was the talking point if I remember correctly. Anyways, and that was like, big name production. And
Yeah.
he would tell us stories about how it was just crazy fast. And they were constantly talking in his ear as well, which I think I personally have not actually heard anyone else working in StarCraft 2 and Valorant and interviewing people who have said, please talk to me more, producer. Almost always, if anything, it's going to be like one word, like get me the like, okay,
You
up
need a cue.
next. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's it. Very few people are going to be like, I wish they would explain to me exactly what's going on, because it is a skill to be able to hear that and talk as if you're not trying to listen, which is apparently what like news anchors do all the
100%.
time.
Having a
So,
co-caster is so useful because if your producer's
oh yeah.
talking in your ear while your co-caster's talking, you can half listen to both
Hmm.
conversations. But if anyone who's watching this has ever had someone talk in their ear while they're talking, it is an order of magnitude more difficult
Oh
to
yeah.
continue to focus on the point that you're trying to get across because you
Yeah.
can't do that and focus on listening at the same time. It's so hard to do that.
Yeah, exactly, and, he would just say that they just constantly talked in his ear. Sometimes not at
Yeah.
him, so he'd have to also, like, differentiate, like, are they talking to me to do something? Are talking to the other guy to do something? So of course, he had a much funnier way of putting it, but I just remember that because I always thought, like, okay, if I ever have that happen, if I ever get to that point, I'm probably gonna be absolutely just floored. I'm gonna be so caught off guard and confused, because it
Yeah.
is, a skill set. I mean, I guess the primary thing, right, is that the constraints are very different. So that's always going to
Yes.
be why it is different. So I don't think esports will ever really have to worry about that, but I don't know, could change. The more we get put on, if we ever do want to go on like, television, I suppose. We seem pretty content. I feel like that age of esports being like, we need to make sure we get on television, we need to make sure we get on cable is like kind of over. I don't know if you agree.
It's so my day job works in marketing and media.
Uh-huh.
So this is sort of where they kind of cross over as well. And I think I'm tending to agree. We're moving away from an age well, we have broadly moved away from an age of linear consumption of content, meaning here is your content, here is your break, here is your content, here is your break.
Okay.
At a top level, services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus are saying, no, 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 you can watch what you want when you want it. And It
Gotcha.
the big reason to want to move to a linear medium to fit in with mainstream TV, which is still huge, by the way, is
Mhm.
because the advertising dollars associated with it would make esports infinitely more sustainable.
Okay.
But you can't guarantee a match would last 15 minutes.
Right.
And then you can go to a scheduled commercial break. Like there were so many fundamental things that could and would break. Um, this is one of the things that Overwatch initially was attempting to solve, right? Because I can't remember the name of the TV station, but even the Face It E League was on TV, was on cable in the US
Mhm.
briefly, and the idea being, oh, if everything was fast paced and matches were finished quite quickly, we can use a casters or desk as variable fill time to hit
Right.
a specific point where we can go to a commercial break and we could keep going, not realizing, of course, that diva players are ridiculously stubborn. And there have been attempts to try and moderate for this, but esports is some way off being able to do that. The good news is the rest of the world is arguably moving on. It's no
Yeah.
longer a 15-minute chunk followed by 3-minute commercials and 15-minute chunk anymore. So as our media consumption patterns continue to change outside of esports, I think we're going to accidentally find that esports becomes more integrated into whatever we want to do with it next as a broadcast medium naturally, because we're no longer trying to shoehorn it into TV.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's very well put, and obviously you've got the expertise in there, so that's very interesting actually. I do wonder often how competitive sports on TV actually do work in that fashion. I have watched American football just by consequence of being an American. You kind of see it in the background a lot, and obviously there's a lot of times where they will uh, I guess fit in breaks like during like the timeouts, for instance, or even
Sure.
between plays. So I imagine there's something there. But then I've also heard maybe from someone on this podcast, actually, or maybe just from Europeans who moved to America, European football, the true football, how that is so difficult for like American programs to air because the amount of breaks is very different
Yes.
for yeah, between the 2 sports, but then also between the 2's, like, home production, right? Like, European ad breaks and American ad breaks are very different. So
Yeah, it
anyways, it sounds like there's people working on such problems, and they do have solutions, and I wonder if they've ever been involved in esports, if they came into Overwatch League, as you were saying, they tried to kinda hit that and were unsuccessful and kinda
mm.
had to admit that it wouldn't work out.
It's very sports specific because American football and some sports are like this as well, to be fair, although global football isn't one of them, where there are frequent breaks in play.
Mhm.
And instead of needing an ad every 15 minutes, the way American football, my understanding of it, is the way they're being flexible is they're saying you have to show this many ads within this many minutes of each other. Now,
Ah,
if there's an opportunistic moment where there's a 20-second break and play, you can instantly take the break and play this ad and come back, and that's that obligation done. And you've got a checkbox worth of things that have to happen before halftime at some in some capacity, and that works. But if you only have a break in the game at halftime, for like soccer, football,
right.
suddenly all of that goes out the window. Or if you're, I'm trying to think, like frequent breaks. Actually, a lot of American sports tend to have frequent breaks. I was about to say baseball or basketball. Basketball, the breaks are really, really quick. So
Yeah.
you might show like a quick ad as someone's getting ready to take a free throw, for example. You can shoehorn 15, 20 seconds in there. Football, I, yeah, I can't see that being a thing. Uh, Cricket to an extent in between overs,
Okay.
possible. Tennis,
Yeah.
again, unless it's like in between games. So it's a little bit more prescribed, but there's such a wide spectrum across the
Mhm.
world of sport and actually across the world of esports as well. Because
Yeah.
there are many esports like fighting games where there are breaks in between rounds where you can probably shoehorn something in, but good luck doing that in a game of League,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, no, League yeah, no, you're totally right, and I'm thinking, like, well, CS:GO, I think when I watch it, I do get the most, uh advertising sponsor mainstream vibe. It's very specific, but
Okay.
it's what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
choosing
yeah,
to
yeah.
go with. Because I know Overwatch League, they kind of did the suit and tie thing to begin with, and they did try to appeal to some of the networks. I think they were on like Disney XD or something at one point. But that's a different type of appealing to what we would consider mainstream. No, for CS:GO, the way that they brand things, the way that they have their um, their halves swap over, and it's just like this
Yes.
really quick throw into pretty quick commercials, and you're right back into the action. Or their little like mini sponsor shout outs while they're waiting for the guys to pick their guns. It's very clean, it's very snappy, but it is chock full of advertising. But it feels like a part of the show a little more like I think
Yes.
mainstream broadcasting of competitive traditional sports. We have to be so specific when we talk about these things. I'm getting lost in my own like descriptions of it. But anyways, so
Well, it
I've
can be
always
split down
liked
so
that.
easily into bite-sized chunks, right? Because even when you
Yeah,
go into overtime, you can stop at the end of 30 rounds, have a quick sponsor segment, and come back to overtime. It doesn't artificially extend the time without ads if you don't
yeah,
want it to. So there's so much more flexibility.
yeah. And I think exactly because CS:GO is very undetermined how long the actual match will go because overtime is just so common nowadays. But
Sure.
the actual rounds I think are much easier to guess like how long those are going to go. Where in StarCraft, I feel like between the two players, even if you put them on the same maps every single time, they'd be wildly different results. And you can't fit
Yeah.
an ad while we're waiting for the brood lords to attack each other, you know?
Or back in
Although
the Roach v. Roach,
yeah,
part of the
yeah.
Storm meta.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, that is absolutely a problem. I was kind of pondering out loud, I wonder if there are people who are literally their jobs are designed to try and fit the square into the circle, right? Fit the European global football, I guess is a better word for it, into American football-esque ad timings, as well
Well,
as the traditional sports into esports.
we're starting to get some way towards it. Like Amazon and Twitch are starting to experiment with shrinking the streamer's screen and having ads
Right.
show on the
Yeah.
bottom and right, for example.
Mhm.
And that sort of advertising where it doesn't detract from the action is exactly the kind of thing that could work in it could be 10 minutes or an hour kind of esport like StarCraft 2, as long as you have certain obligations that you can hit
Right.
in between breaks. The the main issue you're then overcoming is StarCraft 2 tournaments are we're here to watch this all day. And it's very difficult to package it up into this is the 1 hour time slot or the 1 hour 30 time slot allocated to this team versus this team, which traditional TV would still dictate is useful. And where esports like CSGO are still the closest to
Mhm.
fitting into that bracket.
Yeah. Actually, really, again, pondering out loud, I don't know if there's any discussion here, but I am thinking of the way that Pro League and Korean broadcasting would work out so well too, because that was legitimately back in its heyday, bigger than like every sport that they had. So it was on TV. It was actually on TV for a very long time, not
It was
recently though.
really good.
Yeah. And it
Um,
was super cool. But then I also am wondering how that worked out. And clearly Korean broadcasting is going to just be different on those needs. But,
well,
they made it work with Pro League. It always looked like a very professional, high quality product.
it was never just about the game. That was the draw for Pro League for me. Yes, of course, we can go in and see some of the best players on earth beat the crap out of each other in game. But I remember like the team leagues where 8 players would be sat on chairs and you'd interview like each one of them, have some like sound bites to trash talk the other team and build the storyline. And someone comes over and like picks their opponent and it's like, ooh, and you get the crowd reaction and everything. Um, it's that element that I think that raised it beyond, oh, this is just 2 StarCraft players in a tournament.
Yeah.
And that for me is what made a lot of that more appealing. The storytelling, the way they did it was just naturally so much cooler than just we're putting on a StarCraft tournament. And for me, that's probably what gave it the most longevity.
Mhm. Right. Is a lot of things could talk about as far as why Brood War Pro League was the way it is. But certainly, like, the team dynamic is, I don't think you can argue against it. Teams a fully functioning team, I think, is better for, like, competitive environment and fan base growing. Even though I know like fighting games don't really have that type of team camaraderie. You can
Sure.
individually like people who are on cloud nine because they're on cloud nine, but it's not like you're gonna cheer for the team of cloud nine Super Smash Bros. Brothers, Super Smash Bros. Players. There we go.
I have the
Anyways,
same problem with Player Unknown's Battlegrounds. So
yes, exactly the ATM machine. Um, anyways, but moving on from that kind of just general thought cloud. I do want to ask some specifics here for the last couple of minutes of the podcast. We've gone over a little bit, but specifically, what would you say advice for those who they've kind of accepted that they don't want to or they cannot go into esports full time? They have this nice day job. They want to continue working that, or again, they figure that they can't make esports work. What would you say about that
Right.
ability to make the time? How did you make that work?
Uh, well, I think the two biggest pieces of advice I would give, the first is get involved and stay involved with games that you love, that you enjoy playing or you enjoy watching. One of the gigs I thoroughly enjoy, that I still regularly go to, is Luca Comics and Games. Yeah, once a year in Italy. It's like the second biggest Comic Con in the world after San Diego, and
Oh,
I've transitioned in the last couple of years from just being a caster to generally being like a stage host as well. And since about 2017, I've stage hosted their event, which is in the literally in a deconsecrated cathedral. That's where they set up the esports stage. The acoustics are amazing. The atmosphere is fantastic. And I host, I think one point I hosted like Rocket League and Quake Champions as well. And Rocket League and Quake Champions are two games that I do not play. And if I were to play, I would be terrible. But they are possibly my two favorite esports that I don't play that I thoroughly enjoy watching. So I'd come off the stage introducing whoever it was. And instead of having a break or having lunch or going off and doing whatever until I'm required on the stage, I'm glued to what's going on and listening to the casters backstage. And I don't, sometimes I forgot to take a toilet break because I was just so enthralled. I was like, oh, it's the end of the match. I need to go back on stage. Whoops. Um, do what do what you're passionate about and do what you enjoy. Because the biggest problem with not being full time, no, the biggest challenge with not being full time is that I will always continue to hold myself to the same standard, or as close to as possible, to people who are full time in the industry and are proper S tier, ridiculously good at what they do. In any esport, I'm sure anyone can rattle off a number of names and they would be absolutely spot on. So, how do you stay within touching distance of these fantastic people without having the number of hours to put in? It means that when you do a VOD review of yourself, you need to carve time out and make sure that you can accomplish in 2 hours what someone else might accomplish in eight. It might mean not going out drinking on a Saturday night on a weekend and staying in and reviewing your VOD from Friday. The only way you'll be habitually able to make those sacrifices is if you thoroughly enjoy what you're doing. So pick the games you love the most and go after the stuff you want to do. And ergo, be okay with occasionally saying no to something that you don't think would be particularly up your street. Because if you feel compelled to say yes to everything, that's when over time the quality of everything you do can start to decrease a bit.
right. Yeah.
Um, and then the second bit of advice I would give is, even though you're competing with people who are full time and are good at what they do in the industry, it's always better and nicer just as a human being. Think of think of these people as your friends and your colleagues as opposed to competition, because I would rather listen to two gold level casters with insane chemistry all day over listening to two GMs giving me dry analysis of something. 100% of the time, I don't care what the esport is, that will always be true. And the friendlier you are, the more embracing you are of those around you, regardless of their status, you will end up working with them better.
Mhm.
And a rising tide lifts all ships. You'll look better, you'll learn faster, they'll look better, you'll get hired more, and you won't even have to think about the process. So that would be the advice I would give.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Always being open for feedback as well as conversations and a little bit of
100%.
humility will always get you kind of far in in the green rooms as well as in life. I do have a question kind of off of that though. Have you ever really, have to talk about specifics, obviously, don't say any names, but have you ever had someone who kind of like you got the feeling or they straight up told you that they didn't want you to be there because you're not full time, you're not passionate enough about the esport that you're working for?
I've had the feeling that that certain talent might not like me,
Mm,
but I've never actually been told that. So I think it's more so rather than take it personally, I think it's more of a um I'm more used to working with someone else, and therefore it requires a little bit more effort when someone I don't normally work with is also in the room.
okay.
I don't, but no, I don't think I haven't had anyone come or other talent come up to me before and say, I like words to the effect of "I'd rather you not be here" or "Why
Yeah.
are you here" or anything like that. Eh, I would say the circles that I choose to put myself in are generally quite respectful and supportive of each other. Obviously, it's not 100%. Like I've mentioned the Heroes of the Storm example, where rather than have to deal with potential situations like that on the line, I chose to walk away.
Hmm.
But I'm thinking back to like StarCraft, Overwatch, now with PUBG. There's a lot of competition for a very small number of places. But I think I can quite confidently say I've enjoyed working with almost everyone I've ever had to sit next to on a desk. So maybe I'm lucky in that regard, or maybe the people I'm working with are holding back their feelings and not telling me what they really think, Jaro. But I no, I think that aspect's actually been all right for me.
Yeah, I kind of asked as a kind of a teaser, I suppose. Can't get too much into it for people who might be concerned of doing this. So you haven't experienced it. Which, if someone's out there is thinking like, well, I can't devote as much time as that other guy, and what if I get there and they don't like me? Like I'm kind of like ostracized.
Sure.
So with you talking about it, you haven't had that experience. Hopefully, that at least alleviates some fear. Whatever you're getting
Yes.
into, there's a higher chance that people are going to be nice and polite and helpful than a bunch of elitist douchebags. So that's nice. And then if you do have any advice for that kind of feeling of, I suppose, a little bit of imposter syndrome, then feel free to share on that as well. People who just kind of will
Right.
automatically believe, regardless of the contrary, people are judging me because I'm not full time. Because there's going to be
It's
people out there who have that in the back of their mind all the time.
and I still have that in the back of my mind all the time.
Mm,
Like I recently, as in like last year and a half, thought that there was one particular member of talent who I won't name, but someone I look up to. And I was worried that they didn't like me very much. And mainly because outside of events, we didn't really talk to each other in terms of feedback in events. It was all very super slick and professional. Um, and independently speaking to other people who know this talent, they go, "Oh yeah, they're like that with everyone. They just do that all the time." And I've spent 18 months with that thought being fostered in my head, going, "Oh, I wonder if this is bad." And it turns out, unless they're really good at hiding something, that actually this is nothing at all, and I've made it all up. But look, in any industry, you're going to have people who are assholes. It happens. It's the same in esports. It's the same in your desk job. It's the same if you're volunteering for a great cause or charity wherever you happen to live locally. It doesn't matter where you are. Um, Good people can do dick things, and horrible people can do good things. And there will always be a mix of those people everywhere you go if you meet enough people. And it's unpleasant, but it's a fact of life, and that's okay. Um, Being mature about it and saying that's okay. I just need to focus on what I'm doing best. Uh, and exceptions made for someone you literally have to spend 6 hours of your day with every day. In which case, maybe a quiet conversation needs to be had somewhere or things like that. Um, you don't have to deal with it any differently. Deal with it like you would dealing with someone in any other aspect of your life, and more likely than not, um, sweaty esports nerd who you think doesn't like you will probably appreciate that you're dealing with it that way.
mm. Yeah, good advice. And a good stopping point as well. So, excellent little life advice. As you said, it applies broadly to everything you're going to do. Confrontations are
Sure.
going to be had, and a big part of growing up and maturing, not to get too Sesame Street here, um, is learning how to deal with it in a way that if they don't like you, they can't help but respect you. It's kind of the best end
Exactly.
result.
Yes.
So yeah. So with the end of the podcast, I always want to give room for you to shout out whatever you're doing. Any shows you'll be on, any streams you might be doing. So where people can find you.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for having me on. This has been quite eye opening, even for me. I'm like thinking back to stuff that I haven't thought about in quite a while, and sort of bringing the positives and the lessons from that. So it's really nice to have that front of mind again. Thank you. So I tend to stream on my own channel on Jorosar, and I'm Jorosar conveniently on all social media because no one else is silly enough to have the same name, which is awesome. But I think the one thing I would like to shout out is, at the moment, I started in the pandemic and I'm continuing twice a month on the first and third Fridays. I run an online trivia night or a pub quiz, purely to raise money for charity with a small group of us who are volunteering to put this on. The last one was last night. So the fact that I'm doing this semi hungover is like excellent. Um, and if you go to virtual-quizzes.com, you can see when and where to find it. It's 7 o'clock UK time, 8 o'clock Central European time on the first and third Fridays of every month. It is the only thing I do where I put more than 10 hours of prep into each broadcast and do not get paid for it, but I love it to bits. It's really fun. Chat gets to make me drink. There's a hydrate button. They can force me to take sips of my drink. Fun is had by all, and it is always purely for charity. So while I am doing other work in the esports space, and hopefully I get hired to do a whole bunch more in the future, I feel like that's the one I want to shout out.
Nice. Yeah, very wholesome. So that sounds like a lot of fun too. I think that's a great idea.
Come along. It's middle of
Yeah.
the day Friday for you, admittedly, rather than in the evening, but definitely try and come along. Put a team together.
Yeah, just drink if you want to at work. Just be really secret about it.
Discreet.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, no. So yeah, that's it. Thank you so much again for coming on for episode 61, and thanks to everyone out there who watches and/or listens, both I suppose, to the podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports on the Patreon, to Shayne and Vlad IV for co-producing the podcast, and Barrett for reaching out and helping with all things general to the podcast, as well as those who are on the patreon.com/zombiegrub. That go a little bit above and beyond on their support. So Nick, Vinny, Steven, ET, Ravi, Barrett, and CuddleBunny. Thank you guys very much. And I hope to see you all back for episode 62. Bye, guys.